of time. Passing this act will send the Ortega regime a clear message that its violent and repressive behavior has severe consequences and that America is watching. Beyond passing the act, the Biden administration must fully enforce laws that are already in place, like the Nicaraguan Human Rights and Anti-Corruption Act, also known as NICA. Despite NICA placing strict conditions on loans and assistance from international financial institutions, Daniel Ortega and his regime officials have benefited greatly from international financing, which my esteemed chairman and colleague has just talked about with the loans, the $400 million, unconscionable and unbelievable. The Biden administration must ensure that investment conditions are fully implemented to the letter of the law. International financing must not benefit a despotic socialist regime that continues to commit egregious human rights violations. I look forward to hearing more about how the administration plans to address these key challenges and the situations in Nicaragua. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Green. I will now introduce our first panel. Ms. Emily Mendrala serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary covering Central America in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs at the Department of State. She was the Executive Director of the Center for Democracy in the Americas, promoting U.S. policies of engagement towards the Americas from 2017 to 2021. Ms. Mendrala prior government service includes serving as Director of Legislative Affairs in the National Security Council, a special advisor in the Department of State, and a professional staff member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Ms. Mendrala, we welcome you to the hearing. I ask the witnesses to please limit your testimony to 5 minutes, and without objection, your prepared written statements will be made part of the record. Ms. Mendrala, you are recognized for your testimony.
Chairman Series, Ranking Member Green, distinguished members of the subcommittee, it is an honor to appear before you today as President Biden's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs at the Department of State. I look forward to talking with you today about U.S. policy responses to the increasingly authoritarian steps being taken by the Ortega Murillo government in Nicaragua. As you are well aware, the Ortega Murillo government has carried out a ruthless crackdown over the past several months, canceling the registration of opposition parties, incarcerating journalists, opposition leaders, potential presidential candidates, students, private sector leaders, and others who defend free and fair elections, attacking the free press, closing long-standing NGOs that provide humanitarian and medical assistance to Nicaraguans in need. While we had hoped that the government would respond to the voices of the Nicaraguan people themselves and U.S. and international urging to abide by its commitments, we have seen instead an acceleration of Ortega and Murillo's efforts to consolidate their own power. As Secretary Blinken stated on August 7th, quote, "The United States views the regime's latest undemocratic authoritarian actions driven by Ortega's fear of an electoral loss as the final blow against Nicaragua's prospects for a free and fair election later this year. That electoral process, including its eventual results, has lost all credibility," end quote. In the face of sham elections in Nicaragua, we and our international partners must continue to denounce and push back against the Ortega Murillo government's anti-democratic rule, as well as its use of Russian-inspired laws to carry out repression. We must demonstrate that these practices have no place in our hemisphere. We have called repeatedly on the Nicaraguan government to release all political prisoners immediately. We hold President Ortega and Vice President Murillo and those who carry out their authoritarian orders responsible for the detainees' safety and well-being. Every day in August, we highlighted on social media the personal profile of one of the recently detained Nicaraguan political prisoners, drawing widespread media coverage in Nicaragua and in international press to their cases and spotlighting the regime's repressive tactics. These individuals have taken enormous risks and made enormous sacrifices in their efforts to demand genuine democracy in Nicaragua, and none deserves the mistreatment and injustice they are now suffering. The department has taken strong actions already to impose consequences on the Ortega Murillo government. We have worked with the Treasury Department to impose sanctions on those implicated in carrying out the government's crackdown. As of September 14th, 2021, the United States has sanctioned 31 individuals and 8 entities under our Nicaragua and Global Magnitsky sanctions programs, and the Department has applied visa restrictions to 169 Nicaraguans in response to the political crackdown and the application of sham laws that ensure the November election will not be free, fair, transparent, or reflective of the will of the Nicaraguan people. We are working with the international community, urging our neighbors and partners in the region and beyond to join us in multilateral fora to send a clear signal to the Ortega Murillo government that democracies in the hemisphere will reject these repressive actions. Following advocacy by the United States and our partners, the OAS issued a strong resolution on June 15th, backed by an overwhelming majority of 26 member states, which condemned the Ortega Murillo government's arrests and called for the immediate release of political prisoners. At the UN Human Rights Council, we were pleased to be one of 59 governments that called for the release of prisoners on June 22nd. We are also working closely with the EU, Canada, and the UK to coordinate additional targeted measures. We were pleased that Canada announced on July 14th targeted sanctions on 15 Nicaraguan individuals, and we welcomed the EU's August 2nd announcement of sanctions on 8 Nicaraguan individuals, including Vice President Murillo. These joint actions have further isolated the Ortega Murillo government. Through USAID, we continue to support Nicaraguan civil society, independent media, and human rights defenders. Our continued support assures Nicaraguans that the outside world has not forgotten them. In conclusion, the Department of State stands firmly with the Nicaraguan people in their desire for genuine democracy, and we will continue to pursue bold actions in response to the Nicaraguan government's failure to uphold fundamental freedoms and respect for human rights. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you for your statement. And we will now go to questions. The NICA Act of 2018, which I wrote with Congresswoman Ileana Rose-Layton, was intended to restrict Nicaragua's access to loans from international financial institutions, except for funds to address basic human needs. But the Ortega regime has received more than $400 million in recent months from the World Bank and IDB. I guess my question to you is, are we using our voice? Is the administration using its voice and vote with the international financial institution to oppose loans and other financial assistance to Ortega? Because I have to tell you, it's very upsetting to me that we do all this work here, we ask the administration to put sanctions on different people, and yet the IMF, which we probably contribute the largest amount of money, or if not one of the largest amount of money, they seem to just ignore what's going on in Nicaragua. And it really is. I intend to write a letter to the IMF, and hopefully it will happen before this committee, because this is not acceptable. I mean, I don't know if there's any transparency with the money that they get. I don't know what they use it for. I don't know if the IMF knows what they use it for. But there are clear signs that this regime is not interested in going by the law. So my question to you is, are we paying attention to what's going on with the IMF and the loans to Nicaragua?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. Yes is the answer. We are using our voice and our vote in every opportunity in front of multilateral institutions to oppose lending to the Ortega Murillo government. We will continue to use our voice, vote, and influence to advocate against lending from international financial institutions to the Ortega Murillo government, and we will also continue to collaborate with international partners where appropriate, EU, Canada, and others to do the same.
But how is it that they get such a large loan?
The specifics of the IMF loan, as I understand it, was an expansion of special drawing rights. It was a global expansion. And I can assure you that when given the opportunity, the U.S. is using its voice and vote to oppose.
Well, you know, earlier this year, I introduced the Renacer Act, which passed unanimously out of committee. The bill requires targeted sanctions, coordinated with the international community to advance elections in November. I also will expand oversight of loans from international institutions. Will passing this legislation provide the Biden administration with additional tools to address the political crisis in Nicaragua? I mean, if we pass this act, is it going to help you, or is it going to be the same old status quo?
First of all, I want to thank you for the partnership that you and others on this committee have demonstrated and collaboration in addressing the authoritarian trends that we're seeing in Nicaragua. We are familiar with the Renacer Act. We welcome the bipartisanship. We welcome all constructive efforts to hold the Ortega Murillo government accountable. And we are committed to continuing to, as we just discussed in the last question, use our voice, vote, and influence to advocate against lending in international financial institutions. And we look forward to continuing to work with you, and especially if the Renacer Act is passed in this chamber, to continue to use the tools that Congress has given us to hold the Ortega Murillo government accountable.
Do you have any recommendations for us that we could continue to put more pressure on this government to make sure that, you know, there were free, fair elections and doesn't treat its people like it's treating? Do you have any recommendation that we can do here in Congress that you can support, so we can support democratic aspirations in Nicaragua?
Thank you for that question. One of the most important measures over the last several months has been an OAS resolution that passed in June with 26 member states supporting it, that called to account the Ortega Murillo government for actions that were happening in Nicaragua. Through U.S. leadership, we were able to secure a very important coalition of 26 member states. The resolution that was adopted stated that the measures adopted by the government of Nicaragua do not meet the conditions for transparent, free, and fair elections to which all member states have committed under the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which calls into question the legitimacy of the November elections. This was an important move. It was very important for the OAS to put forward a clear and credible and strong response to the actions that we were seeing. And we continue to work with governments throughout the region, through the OAS and otherwise, to continue those strong statements and measures of accountability, and we welcome Congress's partnership.
My time is almost up, but I just will urge you and the department to really put more pressure on the IMF that this is just not acceptable, that they get all this money and God knows how they use it or where it goes. Thank you. Ranking Member Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Madrela, last week, well, let me start by saying this. Today, you've mentioned the Ortega regime or government, and I would encourage you to say the Ortega regime, because I'm not sure that it's really legitimate. In fact, I think it's not. I'm convinced it's not a legitimate government that was duly elected. I think the last several elections since he's been in control have been manipulated, and therefore I would recommend calling him a regime. And so why is that important? Because consistency in words and what we say matter. I'll give you an example. Last week, the U.S. Commercial Service sent an email to U.S. private sector partners highlighting business opportunities in Central America, including those within Nicaragua. It said, quote, "Perhaps most importantly, Nicaragua has a highly organized and sophisticated private sector committed to a free economy that can fully leverage these resources if supported by a responsible government," end quote. Yet the State Department's 2021 Investment Climate Report says, quote, "Investors should be extremely cautious about investing in Nicaragua under President Daniel Ortega's authoritarian government," end quote. These inconsistencies create problems. Maybe that's why the IMF made its bad decision. And your thoughts about these inconsistencies and the importance of the Biden administration saying one thing and sticking to it.
Thank you, Ranking Member Green, for the question. And thank you also for noting the climate that has been created in Nicaragua for private sector investment. it's something that we are paying attention to in the context of Central America writ large. The administration is committed to a new comprehensive approach to address regional migration, as I know you are all aware. And one of the key elements to that approach are targeted efforts to address root causes, to combat the root causes of migration throughout Central America. And there has been a key focus on anti-corruption.
If I could just interrupt, though, I meant us to go a little different direction. I'm talking about messaging and saying a consistent theme, right? So one of the things when we sent the nearshoring bill to your department, very good dialogue happened, and they said, we need a quiver. We need an arrow in our quiver to be able to leverage these, dictators, folks like Nicaragua, to say, look, if you're not acting like this and you act like this, there's a chance you could qualify for some. So the consistency is what I'm asking you to, comment on, and what are y'all doing to fix these obvious contrasts?
Absolutely, we are committed to consistency. Thank you for bringing some of those cases to our attention, and they are already on our radar. There is a robust interagency discussion on Nicaragua. This is a top priority and a chief concern of the administration. The systematic erosion, dismantling of democratic norms and cultures in Nicaragua. And it is something that has the attention at the highest levels, and we are committed to consistency, to continuing to call to account the anti-democratic actions that we're seeing. And support the Nicaraguan people.
I think that's good. Just make sure you guys are calling to account when somebody in your administration sends a message like this email that went out, hey, think about investing in Nicaragua. Changing the subject a little bit, migration issues, you sort of mentioned that, so let's go there. 100,000 Nicaraguans now in Costa Rica. What's the impact on Costa Rica, and how do we address that and help the Costa Ricans address that?
Thank you. I was in Costa Rica in early June at a regional migration conference, and it was clear that there are large flows of Nicaraguans arriving to Costa Rica. This has been the case not just in 2021. It also occurred in the wake of the 2018 political crackdowns in Nicaragua as well. Costa Rica is a very important partner for us in the region, especially on the topic of regional migration. We are committed to work with them. There are several programs through the Department of State, through our Bureau of Populations, Refugees, and Migration that are working in close partnership with international organizations and the Costa Rican government to address these challenges. It's a concern. And if I may, to finish my thought on on anti-corruption and why it is such a chief focus of ours, I think you could have seen a scenario, and we did in many respects see a scenario 5-6 years ago, where some may have given the Nicaraguan government a pass. They said there's relative security and it's a relatively stable investment climate. But we see now that would have been a very bad bet because of the anti-democratic actions. And it's reason why anti-corruption is such an important underpinning for all of our work in Central America, because we have to have that foundation in order to see the efforts to address root causes really prosper.
And you're making my point, if I can, Mr. Chairman, very quickly about the need for consistency from the administration. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member. We will now hear from Member Joaquin Castro for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you for organizing this hearing today. I want to take this opportunity to express my support for the thousands who have been the victims of Ortega's brutal crackdown on human rights. In the last few months, he's broken vital norms and institutions of democratic practice, and the upcoming November 7th elections will be neither free nor fair. I think it's necessary that the United States stands up to this threat to freedom in the region and stands behind those fighting to bring democracy back to Nicaragua. Since June, the Ortega regime has arrested dozens of political opposition, civil society, and business leaders, including Cristiana Chamorro and Ambassador Aguirre Sacasa. Some have been forcibly disappeared for weeks without their families being notified of their whereabouts, while others have been forced to flee the country for fear of imprisonment and torture. So my first question is, what is the U.S. government doing to push for the safe release of these political prisoners?
Thank you, Representative Castro, for the question. We share your concerns, and we share the concerns of so many that have watched this repression take place and followed the grave humanitarian situation of many of those who are unjustly detained in Nicaragua right now. We are speaking out in strong terms in condemnation of these political arrests. We are expressing concern at the fact that some of the prisoners are being held incommunicado without the medicine that they need. We have called for access to the political prisoners by their family members and legal representatives, as well as for needed medication. We launched a social media campaign in August that highlighted the plight of Nicaraguan political prisoners and their families, that garnered media attention in Nicaragua and throughout the international press. And more broadly, we're using the diplomatic and economic tools at our disposal to promote accountability for President Ortega, Vice President Murillo, and other actors in Nicaragua who are complicit in this wave of repression.
Well, with every political opponent either imprisoned or forced to flee, the signs point to Ortega being elected for a fourth term on November 7th. Should this election continue to occur under unjust and repressive measures, how will the administration change its engagement with and public stance on Nicaragua?
Thank you for that question. We have long urged Nicaragua to listen to the Nicaraguan people, abide by its commitments to implement electoral reforms, and allow free and fair elections. And it is clear that the Ortega-Murillo government took steps to consolidate its own power instead. We have already noted through Secretary Blinken's statements that the United States views the regime's latest undemocratic authoritarian actions as the final blow against the prospects for free and fair elections later this year. The electoral process has lost all credibility. We will continue to work through the OAS, work with our partners in international fora, and we will continue to review the U.S. relationship with the Ortega-Murillo government following those elections.
No, well, thank you. And I have one final question on this very important issue of political prisoners and democracy there. You mentioned multilateral institutions and partners. Have we seen any particular nations step up to be helpful in putting pressure on Nicaragua to release these political prisoners? Who has stepped up?
Absolutely. We have had great partnership through the OAS, as I noted. 26 member states joined together in a very important coalition to condemn abuses and stand with the political prisoners demanding their release. We have also seen Canada and the EU in particular take actions, targeted sanctions against Nicaraguan individuals in response to actions, and these are actions that we assess have further isolated the Ortega-Murillo regime, and I would draw attention to Canada and EU's efforts in particular.
No, thank you. And then I'll just ask one final question, and you'll probably have to take it for the record because I'm running out of time. But how, if at all, does Nicaragua fit within the administration's strategy to address root causes of migration from Central America? And how does the administration plan to engage with Nicaragua on root cause issues, given obviously the repression of democracy and human rights? And I'll submit that question for the record. But thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Wonderful to see you again, Emily Mandrella, and I want to thank you because you always took my phone calls when I was begging you to give visas to 2 sick children, Luis Orlando Rodriguez and Hector Trujillo. So I'm indebted to you for that. But I also need to tell you that I am very embarrassed. I am very upset. And because the United States is not present in this hemisphere, period. You know, I represent Miami, the heart of the Cuban exile community and the heart of the Nicaraguan community. And when you tell me that you are working through social media to denounce the Ortega administration, I'm only full of anger because of the people that I represent. it burns like acid on our skin, and I just want to share that with you. Where is the Biden administration? I just have 3 names here that I want to share with you. Maybe people do not recognize who this guy is. This is Arturo Cruz, who was ambassador for Ortega to Washington. He is in jail. He's lost 30 pounds. This guy, Felix Maradiaga, has been tortured, psychologically tortured. And here we have Chamorro, who we do not know what's really happening with him. So not only we have abandoned these people, the Biden administration has abandoned these people, but like my colleague said, no, we're helping them. In August, the IMF gave $353 million to the repressive apparatus. Did you know about that loan? $353 million to Ortega last month? Did the State Department know about this? Just yes or no?
We have used our voice, vote, and influence in international financial institutions.
No. I'm asking you, did you guys know, did you guys call the United States representative in the IMF? We give $100 billion to the IMF. Did you guys call the IMF and said, no, we cannot do that? Did you do that, yes or no?
We oppose lending through international financial institutions.
So that means that the executive director did not pay attention to what the State Department was telling them not to give a loan to Ortega for $353 million.
Ma'am, I can tell you that in every instance we have opposed lending.
So that means that our own representative is not paying attention to the State Department.
No, ma'am. I can tell you that we have opposed in international.
But it still happened.
Institutions.
We opposed it, but they received it. And what do you think they're going to give that money to? Just to put these people in jail and torture them even more. And not only that, I just want to share with you something else that's happening. In January of next year, the Commerce Department next year is putting together an event that says that Nicaragua is committed to transparency and the rule of law. Our Commerce Department, did you know about that?
We have, through the interagency process, spoken with all of our interagency
I'm just asking you if you knew about
the
this
challenges
event
in Nicaragua.
specifically. There is one event from the Commerce Department saying that Nicaragua is committed to transparency. Did the State Department know about that?
It's been brought to my attention, yes, ma'am.
It was, so then what did you say? Yeah, let's promote Nicaragua.
No, in
No?
fact, that's not the case.
So what did you say?
Gravely concerned about anti-democratic actions in Nicaragua, and we have made that known throughout.
I know you're concerned, but I'm asking you if the State Department can make sure that the Commerce Department does not hold that event in favor of Nicaragua.
We are absolutely committed to working with the Commerce Department to register our concerns.
Register your concerns means that it may happen, it may not. And what like Representative Sears just said, we passed a law called Renacer. The Senate passed this law, and Speaker Pelosi is not willing to bring it to the floor. You have nothing to do with that, but I am sure that the Biden administration could help and call Mrs. Pelosi and say, we would like to see Renacer on the floor. Now, let me just see if I have one more minute, and if I can get a little bit more time. Cuba. We have had many discussions about Cuba. I always ask you about connectivity. My question is, how many companies on the private sector have you called to ask for due diligence for connectivity for Cuba? How many companies?
We have spoken with several. I can't give you a number off the top of my head, but we are having regular convenings with private sector actors to promote efforts.
I'm not saying about promoting, I'm saying asking for due diligence to figure out who can provide internet to Cuba. How many?
It's
3, 5, 6, how many?
It's a chief concern of ours. And
No, I'm not saying it's a chief concern. I'm asking how many people have you asked to do due diligence for connectivity for Cuba?
We have spoken with several private sector actors.
When are they going to give you a response?
Many of them are already engaging through several different means.
But you've always told me that it's not that easy. I did my due diligence. I have one company. Have you communicated with them, the one who is most advanced?
We have spoken with several companies, yes, ma'am. And I believe I know the company to which you're referencing, and we have had conversations with them.
All right. So you think that by next month, can you commit that by next month you can give the members of Congress a report of what's happening with the due diligence for connectivity for Cuba?
We would be happy to brief, yes.
So that means that I have your word on the record that by next month you're going to give the members of Congress a report on what's happening with that.
We would be happy to brief.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We now recognize Andy Levin for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And you know, it's so upsetting where things have come to in Nicaragua. I remember when the Somoza dictatorship fell in 1979, and there were hopes for democracy. And today, the level of repression and the number of people thrown in prison is just very, very upsetting. So, Ms. Mandrala, the Biden administration requested a total of $15 million for the fiscal year 2022 for assistance to Nicaragua, all of which was supposed to be for democracy, rights, and governance programs. Explain what we've been doing with our democracy assistance in terms of pushing back against Ortega's repression, and what could be done better.
Thank you, Representative Levitt, for the question. We are, through USAID, supporting Nicaraguan civil society, independent media, and human rights defenders as they fight for a return to democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights. It is a tough operating environment, as you can imagine, and our support assures Nicaraguans that the outside world has not forgotten them.
So basically, we're helping to fund organizations that are under attack and whose leaders may be being put in jail and this kind of thing. And we're just kind of doing our best to keep them afloat. Is that what we're doing?
There are several organizations in Nicaragua and civil society and independent media that are doing great work. They are taking great risks as well to promote democracy, anti-corruption, bringing information to the world about what is happening in Nicaragua. And some of our democracy promotion assistance comes alongside these organizations to support their work. It is as I said, a very difficult operating environment, especially over the last few months, as we have seen systematic repression and imprisonment of several of the champions for democracy in civil society, opposition leaders, journalists, private sector leaders, and others. And
all right, I just have a couple more minutes, so let me just ask you, if you can share with my office, kind of information about that. I'd look forward to reviewing it. And but I also want to talk to you about the humanitarian situation. You've mentioned it. It's a real crisis. There have been 2 hurricanes in November of last year, the COVID-19 pandemic. My understanding is only 2.5% of Nicaraguans have been fully vaccinated, and at least a third of the country is living in poverty. There are high rates of malnutrition, as there have been for years. Can you describe what our U.S. support is for Nicaragua to respond to the hurricanes and the pandemic, or for Nicaraguan people to? And how are we seeking to address the current humanitarian crisis in Nicaragua?
Thank you very much for that question. I will note that Nicaragua is the second poorest country in the hemisphere. Their economy contracted 3.9% in 2019 and 3% in 2020. We are very concerned about the humanitarian situation on the island in the wake of the hurricanes, as you mentioned, and also because of the mismanagement of the pandemic in the country and its dire impacts. With respect to vaccines, in early June, President Biden announced that the United States will donate 500 million Pfizer vaccines to 92 low and middle income countries and the African Union. It was a historic action that will help supercharge the global fight against the pandemic. Nicaragua is one of the countries receiving vaccines under the COVAX mechanism, and it's eligible to receive this donation. It's another example of support for the Nicaraguan people. While at the same time,
how many vaccines have we donated, and how many have been actually distributed? You called Nicaragua an island a minute ago. I think you're referring to the poorest country in the hemisphere, Haiti, where distribution is a huge problem. and a very small percentage of the 500,000 doses that we sent there have been distributed. What's the situation in Nicaragua as my time expires?
Thank you for that question. I'm happy to get back to you with specifics about vaccine distribution. To my knowledge, vaccines have not yet been distributed, but Nicaragua is eligible to receive the donation that the United States made to COVAX.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Levin. Now we recognize Representative Juan Vargas for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity, and I in particular want to thank the witness here today. I would, at the outset, note that in the Renacer bill, we actually call the Ortega government the Ortega government. So we should be consistent ourselves. If we want to call them the Ortega regime, we should call them the Ortega regime. But anyway, so the only reason I say that is because I think Deputy Assistant Secretary Emily Medrada is just simply following what we wrote. I'm also on that bill. I am very disappointed with what has happened in Nicaragua. I was a young Jesuit missionary back in 1986, and I went to Nicaragua, and I was there at the UCA, the Universidad Centroamérica, and stayed for 2 weeks on my way to El Salvador, where I was then stationed for a much longer period of time. And Nicaragua was very poor. Obviously, it was coming out of what had happened with Somoza. And the tragedy is it seems to be exactly the same again. I mean, you have a dictator there, and this dictator is enriching himself and impoverishing his people. He's once again, just like Somoza, using incredible repression, violence against his own people. I do want to ask you specifically, if I could, Ms. Mandrala, about the university there. The rector of the university is a priest by the name of Chepe Iliaquez. I had received information from the Jesuits of Central America that his life was in danger a number of times. That he was out there protesting and helping some of these students who were being shot, and he was bringing them to the rectory and bringing them to the university. Could you give me more information on that?
Thank you very much, Representative. We share your concerns and the devastation for events in Nicaragua, for anti-democratic actions, and the impacts on the people. I think it's really important that we keep centered the human aspect of this, the consequences that Nicaraguan people are facing. On the specific case of the university there, I am familiar with the university, but not the specific security concerns of the rector. I would be happy to follow up with you after this hearing to get additional information, provide information that we know through our embassy, and also discuss ways that we can be helpful.
Well, I'm very concerned about it, just to be frank. I was in El Salvador after Nicaragua, and of course they killed a lot of the Jesuit priests there. They were able to go into the rectory. The name of the university is the same. It's Universidad Centroamérica, although it also has an addition, Simón Cañas, in El Salvador as opposed to Nicaragua. And I'm very concerned because the university and this rector have spoken out about the evils of this regime, and in doing so, I think has put themselves in harm's way, and we certainly need to do all we can to help them. And again, I do look forward to that briefing from you. I'm very, very concerned about Chepe and the university there. Lastly, I do want to ask, I mean, it does seem to me rather odd that with all the repression, torture, the murder, the disappearance, we're giving these guys money through the IMF. That just doesn't make sense. I mean, this money wasn't going specifically towards the pandemic, was it? I mean, it seems like they were using it for other items and other purposes.
Thank you for the question. As I understand it, this was an expansion of special drawing rights, and it was a global expansion. And as I've noted, we take very seriously our responsibility, and we are at every opportunity using our voice, vote, and influence to advocate against lending through international or financial institutions to the Ortega Murillo government. We'll continue to do so. And we have taken note of strong congressional opposition to the recent IMF loan, and we will certainly, through our good offices at the State Department, make those concerns known.
Ms. Mandrala, do we have the ability to veto a drawdown like that from them? As the
Sir, I
largest,
do not know the answer to that off the top of my head. My suspicion is no, but I'll take that back and get back to you.
Thank you very much, and I really do appreciate you being here, and I'll look forward to getting back to you about the university. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman Vargas. Well, thank you, Ms. Vendrala, for your testimony, for answering the questions. I look forward to working with you in the coming weeks and months to do everything we can to support the democratic aspirations of the Nicaraguan people. But we will be following up on this issue of the loans from the IMF, because it's really not fair to the people of Nicaragua. It was supposed to go to vaccines. You know, obviously you're telling me that you don't know much of any type of programs to vaccinate the people of Nicaragua. So where's the money going to? So I thank you for being here, and I will recess for a few minutes for the second panel to take their seats. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry, you want to say anything?
No.